the biochemistry in our brains changes throughout our life. The parts of our brain that are running the show change over time. A lot of what you have been talking about is very appropriate for someone in our general age bracket, but may not hold true for someone who's a teenager. So I think sometimes kind of setting our parameters and understanding who we're talking about and who we're talking to can help us.
Hey friends, thanks again for joining our show today. This is Stop Feeling Terrible, the Art of Managing Your Brain, and I am Dr. Charlie Hornes. I am so glad to have you with us because I have such an incredible guest today. I am welcoming Dr. Kelly Averill, who is a neurologist. And I did promise you that I would be bringing on a clinical person. So surprise, it's Dr. Averill. And she's a legit neurologist. She has been in her field for nearly a decade. She did her bachelor's at Texas A&M and medical school at UT. And I'm supposed to let you all know that although she did UT medical school, she is a ride or die Aggie. So I'm going to keep my opinions to myself because I don't want to get in trouble, but I'll let y'all, talk amongst yourselves. But yeah, she's a diehard Aggie. But I'm really glad to have her on. And the reason is because my discipline is from the coaching perspective, obviously, with a lot of research from my doctorate work in neuroscience, neurobiology, biopsychology, behavioral, and social sciences. But I did not go to med school, and I caveat that all the time. So Dr. Averill has listened to my episodes, and I asked her, is there anything that I've gotten wrong? Is there anything that the science is not correct on? Is there anything she wants to expound upon? So she's going to get into all of that. And the reason that I have her on is because when I start talking about neurology and haven't gone to med school, that can, be suspicious. And my whole goal here is to build trust with y'all so that you know that what this coaching methodology and strategy is teaching is legit and it is based in science. So Dr. Averill and I are going to have a conversation about all of the things that we've talked about so far. So if you're ready to learn about real science and your brain from a medical doctor and a clinical specialist, then get ready for Dr. Averill. All right, here she comes. Let's go.
I'm Dr. Charlie Hornes, highly anxious people pleaser turned master certified professional life coach. Learning to manage my brain was so life-changing for me that I got certified so that I could teach these incredible evidence-based practices to you. Are you ready for massive change? Let's go.
Hey friends, thank you, Dr. Averill, for joining us. Do you want to give us a little intro?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Kelly Averill. I'm a pediatric neurologist, and I'm joining my friend remotely. I've known Reverend Dr. Charlie Hornes for many years, and I've always enjoyed our friendship and getting a chance to work with her. And so I'm excited to be with you today.
Awesome. So we have entirely different disciplines. Would you like to expand on that? You are a medical school educated. You are a specialist in neurology and the brain in your specific discipline and field. And maybe you can help us understand why you and I are going to have some conversation today.
Yeah. I have a bachelor's degree in biology, so I've always been a science geek. And after I finished that, I worked for a little bit, and then I went to medical school, and then I did training in pediatric neurology. So that does give me a particular set of skills and knowledge, but also a particular set of biases that I have to reckon with from time to time. But as you yourself know, Dr. Charlie, all along the way, there has been people from other disciplines around me, and that has been complementary to what I bring to the lives of my patient. I'm always appreciative that my angle is only one angle. what works best a lot of times is if we can take the science of neurology and mix it with the science of behavior and a bunch of different things, and kind of bring it all together, because we are more than just a bag of chemicals. We kind of start as that, but it becomes more than that. And so we need more than one way to look at it.
Awesome. And just as a reminder, the lens that I'm coming from my particular doctorate work is the intersection, I would hope, of correct science and specifically working on learning about the brain, neuroscience, neurobiology, intersecting that with the social and behavioral sciences, as well as cutting edge, brand new life coaching techniques to help people who are struggling with issues understand that a lot of it is just our brains. Once we understand that, it makes the shame, the guilt, the feeling like something's wrong with us, and all of that get out of the way so that we can function on solving problems. So I know you've listened to previous episodes. Is there anything on there that you feel maybe I got wrong or you want to expand on or clarify? I just want to make sure I've been on track here from a doctor perspective.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything in your work that felt wrong to me or where I was like, well, that's not true according to the science. One thing I think is really important to know is that our brains change. They evolve throughout our lives. And I think if you think about the people in your life, this is something we all understand. I mean, a baby is very different from a teenager who's very different from someone in their middle ages. Our brains are the root of all of that. So what's true for us in terms of the biochemistry in our brains changes throughout our life. Also, the parts of our brain that are running the show change over time. A lot of what you have been talking about is very appropriate for someone in our general age bracket, but may not hold true for someone who's a teenager. So I think sometimes kind of setting our parameters and understanding who we're talking about and who we're talking to can help us.
So I think that's a really great point, because when we're talking about coaching, most of our students and clients and listeners are what we would generalize as more, quote, high functioning, if you will. When we're talking about significant mental health issues that obviously are real, and I take that very seriously, I partner with our clinical mental health professionals and doctors like yourself that know better about these things. So I refer and I stay out of their lane and I stay in my lane. So when we're talking about people that aren't dealing with significant mental health diagnoses, but are struggling with frustrating behavior, I can say that, when I was young, I didn't care what people thought about me. And I didn't struggle with fight, flight, freeze, all these things. That I didn't care about conflict. I loved talking back to people. And I think between experience, like difficult experiences, maybe some of that confidence getting a little beat out of us by joining the real world, and the changes in the chemicals in our brains, when we get older, these things begin to matter. And I think that's really cool to have you on here to talk to us about why that begins to happen just from a brain standpoint. Do you want to chat about that?
Absolutely. In working with primarily a pediatric population, I get to see people from the time that they're born, when they're babies, up until they're young adults. And the teenage brain is something that kind of has to be reckoned with by the rest of the population. The teenage years, if you think back to like our ancestors, the people that existed and thrived long before history, teenagers, they were the warriors. Things like being impulsive and being novelty seeking, having a desire for adventure, that served us well to have a group of people in our communities who were ready to fight. They were ready to explore new things. They were ready to take risks. And that is the way the teenage brain is wired. The teenage brain is far more wired to prioritize novelty-seeking behavior, and the reward system is far more active than it is in younger children and also in older people. The desire to seek new experiences drives teenagers to do things that sometimes are good and sometimes are bad. But those pathways don't necessarily go away as we start to age because we've been strengthening them throughout our teenage years and our early 20s. So they're still there. We just have homeostatic pathways that decide to come in and try and save us from our impulsivity. By the time you get to our age, you've got both of those two systems sometimes warring with each other. And that can be good to understand about yourself, is that the pathways that you strengthened as a young adult are still there. They may not be serving you well anymore. What serves us well in one stage in our life isn't what necessarily serves us well in later stages of our life. But that pathway doesn't just disappear because it's no longer helpful. Sometimes that's what we have to work on as we age, is picking out different pathways, deciding that those are going to serve us better and strengthening those.
Let me take you back real quick. Would you talk about what that homeostasis is so that we better understand it? Because what do you mean by their two systems are warring with each other sometimes?
So homeostasis is the idea that everything needs to stay more or less the same. Our bodies want to operate within certain parameters, and those parameters are things like temperature. We're really hot in Texas right now. We don't like that, so we seek out cooler environments. They can be things like blood sugar. We want about the same amount of blood sugar going at all times. So we have a complex set of pathways in our brain that drive our behavior to maintain a steady state. That tends to be at odds with the reward-based pathway. The reward-based pathway seeks out new things. It seeks out things to give us a rush of excitement or a sensation of pleasure. And that can sometimes be at odds with our desire at the same time to exist within certain parameters. So you're being pulled in two different directions. One that pulls you out of homeostasis and one that tries to pull you back in.
So how much of this sort of warring system happening in our brains has to do with those frustrating behaviors we struggle with, people pleasing, fight, flight, freeze, addiction, just all the things that I think create shame and guilt in people?
So it's very hard to know exactly what in our lives comes from that versus what comes from our upbringing and our environments, because all of that exists within the same person. It's hard to measure in any sort of practical sense. But I think one of the things to work on as people is to understand that that's kind of our biological basis. Then the way we behave in society kind of springs from that.
When you bring up society, is this something you could speak about? The role of the neurotransmitters, for example, when I was talking about how dopamine is seeking safety from a survival mechanism and serotonin is sort of the social drug that wants to keep us within the tribe, both things trying to keep us from getting eaten by the bear. My argument is that a lot of that isn't useful today.
I think that we are highly social animals, and we have been for as long as anyone knows. So part of what our brains do attempt to do is keep us in the tribe, like you said. The thing that has changed is not necessarily those systems in the brain, but what constitutes a tribe. I think we still need a tribe in order to feel emotionally fulfilled and to enjoy our day-to-day existence. The tribe is no longer necessary moment to moment, second to second in terms of just surviving. So I think its relative importance in our lives has shifted.
That's so fascinating. Aren't there basically two different brains that we have? Leftover survival brain, and then we have this more evolved prefrontal cortex that gives us a difference between animal and human?
I don't personally think of it as two separate brains. I think of a lizard brain wearing a human brain hat almost. It's the lizard brain isn't entirely purposeless to us as humans. It was more important in the past. Sometimes it tells us to do things that feel like the right choice, and they're not. Like you said, the donut feels like the right choice, but it's not in a lot of circumstances currently. I think the thing also to remember is our ancestors evolved in a time of scarcity. I'm an Irish American. So my genes survived a famine that is still famous to this day. So I come from a stock of people who successfully found food and didn't die in a time where it was hard to do. I'm not faced with that same set of adverse circumstances, but I have a lot of the same brain that they did. So my brain still tells me I need to eat more food because my brain is still trying to set me up to survive a famine. But the famine doesn't come for most of us. We still have these brain systems that kept us going in a time of uncertainty and scarcity of resources. We don't necessarily need them to play that same role today.
That's fascinating. When I learned about this mechanism in our bodies, this sort of thing that keeps us alive still today, which is incredibly important. It's the thing that causes us to jump out of the way of the oncoming car or, all the things. You know how you react instantly. You even know that you've done it or you've heard stories about that. There's an incredible need for that entire system and mechanism in our bodies, but it also can override when we're not in physical danger. Is that true?
Yeah, we are still hardwired to escape the bear. I think a lot of anxiety comes down to feeling like there's a bear and the bear actually isn't there. Once you realize that, it can help you start to take that feeling a little less seriously. That feeling doesn't immediately go away. In fact, it probably never fully will. And that's okay. What is helpful to me in my life is to not take that feeling that there's a bear behind me super seriously. So I can have that feeling and it doesn't have to drive my behavior. I can acknowledge it and be like, yeah, but I know the bear's not there. So I don't have to run away from it. That's kind of how I approach it.
When you discovered this on your educational journey and personal journey, what was it that changed? Did it take out all of the personal, something's wrong with you? And I know you and I talked before about shame and guilt and all these things we beat ourselves up over. If only I could change this. Why can't I stop doing this? Our brains, do they think that person yelling at us is putting us in physical danger? And that's why we can't stop this behavior? What is your take on all of that?
I think that our brains do jump to some conclusions and they do tend to think that things that aren't bears are bears. The feeling of being threatened, it creates kind of a cascade of thoughts and emotions in your brain that may not be in proportion to the actual threat. And part of it for me has been sort of reassigning value to certain threats, to understand that someone not liking me may not be a threat. It feels like a threat. But, as you get older, I think one of the gifts that most people get is realizing that not everybody has to like us. It's great when people do, because that's the shared basis of friendship and social bonds, but not everybody has to.
That kind of plays into what you're saying about maybe today we get to choose our own tribe. Yeah, I think about, especially for women probably couldn't have stood up for themselves or talked back in the sort of tribal days, because even if the person in charge didn't make a lot of sense or whatever, they would get thrown out and they have to worry about their kids and stuff like that. And as women, especially, we don't have to do that today necessarily. Do you think so?
Yeah, I think that there are different ways to have a successful life now. It used to be that everybody, I think, was kind of shuttled into a very similar pathway, and we can opt out of certain elements of it. Like women don't have to get married. Women don't have to have children. They can, those are valid choices, but it is more optional than it ever has been. I think that we have to balance that against a tendency to get isolated. So the tribe used to be automatic, I think. And there was some good to that. It meant you didn't have to expend energy finding it. But it did mean that if you were in a tribe that didn't welcome you or didn't tolerate who you were as a person, it was dangerous. So now we don't have to exist in the tribe that doesn't tolerate who we are, but we have the task of finding one that does.
That's powerful. And that, I think, in this day and age gives us, especially women, the power to do that. But wouldn't you say the awareness of knowing a lot of what drives our feelings, actions, results have a lot to do with the way our brains are created for survival. And to learn that, to have, for me, it was an aha moment, and it empowered me to say,
Yeah.
I don't have to care about blah, blah, blah. I don't have to care what this person says. That's my brain saying, this will save me if they keep me, they like me, I stay in the tribe. I'm maybe the only one in the entire world that had this moment, but I was like, are you serious? Like, wow, this whole time, my whole life, I've cared about all this stuff, and it was just my brain doing stuff that was cool.
And I think you and I have a similar history too, in terms of like weight loss. I used to binge eat, and it caused me a lot of psychic distress. I didn't enjoy what I was doing, but I didn't really understand why I was doing it either. And that is a very hard place to be in. It creates a lot of misery, but through that misery, I got the desire to change. And I was very lucky in that I met a behavioral therapist. I sought out cognitive behavioral therapy for my eating patterns. And it was probably one of the most helpful things I've ever done in my whole life. One of the things that was most helpful about it is there was no time wasted on rolling around in that misery. You know, she kind of accepted the fact that if I was there in her office, I had already done the misery part. I had already felt that about myself. We didn't need to do that again. So it was able to begin from a standpoint of, well, you made your way here, so you want to change. So let's start changing.
As you know, I am a big fan of what changed my life, which is what we call thought work, managing our brains. And I know that cognitive behavioral therapy, doesn't that focus on our thoughts and changing our thoughts, which change our feelings, results, actions, etc.?
Yeah, the idea behind it is that we all tell ourselves certain stories. And in the interest of staying in my lane, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. So this is an outsider's view of this. But the idea is we tell ourselves stories about what we do. Some of those stories are just not true. So looking at what they call the cognitive distortions that we have, that we tell ourselves, can sometimes help us change a behavior, because our behaviors are supported by thoughts. And then we engage in a behavior and it causes feelings and leads to more thoughts. Looking at the thoughts that start the pathway can be very powerful, because some of what we've all been carrying around with us are lies, oftentimes well-meaning lies that we got from people who are older than us. I was telling you yesterday that I grew up in one of those families where you had to finish your plate at mealtime, whether you were hungry or not hungry, if you liked the food or didn't like it, you had to finish it. And so I grew up accepting that as true. What that taught me was to ignore the signal that my body was saying to me, which was, you're full, put down the fork. I was kind of forced to not listen to that inner sensation. What that did was it kind of made me estranged from the signals my body was giving me. It also, I just sort of walked around with this idea that if I didn't consume resources, that was a way of showing the rest of the world that I was ungrateful for them, which isn't true. Me saying I'm going to eat 3/4 of a hamburger instead of a full hamburger is not disrespectful to other people. But that was something I was telling myself. Part of what my therapist was doing for me was helping me unpack all these feelings that I had that were based on things that I was told that just weren't true.
I know so many people that say ugly things, and they think what they're saying is true about me or about whomever they're talking to. And when I learned that their thought was also a story and it wasn't real about me, and I did not have to accept that, I could say, oh, wow, look at what your brain is spitting at you. Like, wow, and then you have the nerve to open your mouth and spit it at me and you think it's real. That's crazy. I get, again, empowered and aha, and I no longer care what people say about me because I know it's not real. Obviously, if I've done something, right? Again, something has to be proven in the court of law. That's different. But
yes,
I mean, yeah, that's why we have courts of law, right? To like hold people accountable for bad behavior. But if your opinion about me and my broken air conditioner is that I'm a piece of crap or whatever, I don't have to buy that, right?
No, you don't. You don't. I have always been one of those people that tends to not put up with the friend that tells me I'm a piece of crap, but I put up with the voice in my head that tells me I'm a piece of crap. And a lot of people have that inner voice that engages in a lot of negative self-talk. What has helped me was, and I think I just read something somebody wrote on the internet, imagine if the negative thoughts you have about yourself, if somebody in your life said those to you. Would you let other people talk to you that way? I often talk to myself about myself in my head in a way that I wouldn't put up with from other people. And another way that you can think about that is, would you let somebody talk about your best friend that way? Would you stand up and have words with somebody if they were saying those negative things about your best friend? Yeah, probably. We need to treat ourselves at least as well as we would our best friend, because we should be our best friend. But that is hard. And it did kind of help me to take a step out of my own head and imagine that thing that I just thought about myself. How would I feel if those words came out of somebody else's mouth?
And on the flip side to that, is it true you can change your thoughts and have different feelings? Like in the moment, if you caught yourself saying, oh, well, I'm a piece of crap, and you can go, oh, I don't like how that feels. How about I say, I'm amazing. And all of a sudden I'm feeling different and I'm doing different things. I'm getting different results. Can you do that? Because I do that and I want people to know that they can do that. But if I'm wrong, tell me.
I definitely think that what you are experiencing is true. One of the things that is kind of universal to either self-help books or group therapy or individual therapy is examining thoughts and considering thinking something different instead. That can be very hard to get started on. I think that the best way to get started on it for me, if I kind of look back at like when I decided to stop beating myself up as much, was to say, I'm just going to try on this new thought. I'm not saying it's going to be my new thought, but I'm going to experiment with, well, what if I thought this way instead? That can give you the chance to maybe break out of those patterns.
When we talk about doing the same behavior over and over again, when it's a maladaptive behavior, that creates actual pathways in our brains, right? And that's part of our brain remembering to do something versus not do something, sort of reward and threat. If I continue to do something that I don't want to do, I'm literally building pathways in my brain to keep doing it, right?
Yes.
And can you undo that? If you stop the thing?
You can. Yeah. You can undo it. Maybe you can't undo it 100%. You can change the relative importance in your life of that negative pathway. I think an analogy that can be helpful that I've heard a lot of people use is kind of thinking of these maladaptive behaviors as unreasonable toddlers. If you give in to the toddler that's screaming and crying and throwing a fit in the middle of Target by giving them the toy, the next time you're in Target, they will do the same thing. Basically, we all go through life with a toddler that's throwing fits. And one of the things we can start to work on is deciding which toddler to reward. I think the other thing that brings up, though, is recognizing that if you have been going down a pathway that's maladaptive, you probably still were getting something short-term out of it. So examining why it was happy, pleasant, pleasurable in the short term can be helpful. Counteracting that with, okay, well, it was happy in the short term, but it causes me long-term distress.
You just set me up for my big question. I'm so excited. Okay.
Is this about donuts?
Donuts? Yes, it is. Yeah, I love donuts.
Yeah.
Okay. Can we talk about the role of the neurotransmitters into all of this? And again, I know that is sort of a newer field and things are going to change probably as y'all keep discovering new things. But that reward, the kid it's not the caring of the opinion or the threats or this or that and the other. When they get the reward, there's a neurotransmitter involved. Can you talk about some of that?
Part of our drive for survival is learning where we can get things that sustain us. So that reward pathway that's largely, though not entirely, dopamine based, that says, hey, if you go look over here, there will be food. you get a reward when you move towards that thing that you're looking for. You get a burst of happy chemicals that make you feel good in your brain. Then you're more likely the next time to go down that pathway, and it strengthens the more you do it. Dopamine is essentially happy juice for your brain. So is serotonin. There's a couple different happy juices that our brains make. And when you do the thing that unleashes the happy juice, you feel good. So you want to do that more. But sometimes the thing that gets your brain to give you that hit of happy juice is pleasurable in the short term and maladaptive in the long term. Your body wants, like you've talked about, it wants to seek energy and avoid the expenditure of energy because that's how you survive as a living organism. Your body is going to give you happy juice when you find the donut. That's going to tell you that you just did a good thing. Found the donut. Good job. So not only do you get the donut, but you get the little burst of happy juice in your brain.
Do we chase that burst?
Yeah, I think we do. And I was reading last night in preparation for our conversation today about the nature of addiction. And I think one of the things that's important to understand is we all have different things that trigger the burst of happy juice. Part of what underlies addiction is we are pursuing that burst of happy juice in a way that doesn't actually benefit our survival. We are focusing on the burst of neurotransmitters at the expense of the things that the neurotransmitters are supposed to bring us. Our reward system is not meant to be a goal in and of itself. It's supposed to cause us to be part of a tribe. It's supposed to make mothers feed their babies. It's supposed to make us seek out food and avoid dangers. It's supposed to keep us and our relatives going. But addiction, it becomes divorced from the goals of the reward system. And now all we have is the reward system. The neurotransmitter burst doesn't last that long. Dopamine, we don't fully understand all of the roles it does in the brain because it's hard to sample the brain. But we know some things about the way dopamine is metabolized by working with people who have Parkinson's. People who have Parkinson's have degeneration, the dopamine producing neurons in their brain. We can't give them just dopamine because most of it gets metabolized before it ever gets to the brain. So they have to concoct a version of dopamine that breaks down more slowly. People who are on dopamine for Parkinson's have to take the medication many, many times a day because dopamine just doesn't last that long in our brain. So that reward system is not meant to be the sole purpose of survival. It is supposed to move us towards the things that sustain us, and then it's supposed to fade into the background. But when you become addicted to something, you just kind of like hitting that reward pathway over and over and over again, and it just doesn't last long enough. If that's all you're getting from the behavior is that burst of chemicals, that burst of chemicals isn't going to be with you very long, so you have to do it again and again.
Was there anything else that over everything we talked about you wanted to address or add? Or
I think, let's all just be kind to ourselves and others.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, and we're going to sign off. So thanks everybody for listening, and we will talk to you soon. Bye.
Absolutely. Have a great day. Bye.